What if I told you that Ferrari has just discovered a problem so serious in its 2026 project that Canada could become the start of a new crisis within Maranello? Because while many believe that the Scuderia is finally ready to once again dominate Formula One, the reality behind the SF26 would be much more worrying than it seems. A brutal power deficit compared to Mercedes, energy recovery problems, an extremely unstable car in acceleration, and a dangerous dependence on massive updates are setting off all the alarms within the paddock. And the most shocking thing is that Canada could publicly expose all those weaknesses for the first time. Hamilton is already starting to feel the pressure. Leclerc is pushing the car to the limit. And Ferrari is now facing the most important technical challenge of the entire new hybrid era. Because if Montreal goes badly, it could be clear that SF26 was never really prepared to fight for a championship. Today we are going to discover what is really happening inside Ferrari, why the 2026 project generates so many internal doubts, and how a hidden problem could completely change the future of the Scuderia. While Ferrari tries to publicly convince the world that it is still in the fight for the future of Formula One, internally the situation is beginning to become much more tense than it seems. Because Canada not only represents a critical race for performance, it can also become the point where Hamilton and Leclerc begin to demand real answers about the direction of the 2026 project. And that is extremely dangerous for a team that historically has always suffered when political pressure begins to mix with technical problems. The most striking thing is that Ferrari does have pure speed, and that is precisely what makes the current situation even more frustrating. There are times where the SF26 seems absolutely unstoppable in fast sectors. There are laps where Hamilton manages to extract impressive performance from the car. Even Leclerc has managed to partially hide some weaknesses thanks to his extremely aggressive braking and corner entry style. But the problem arises when they try to maintain that performance consistently over a full stint. There the car begins to slowly fall apart, and Hamilton would already be feeling it. Because one of the big reasons why Ferrari bet so heavily on Lewis was precisely his ability to develop championship cars during complex regulatory cycles. He did it at Mercedes for years. Hamilton always excelled at identifying structural weaknesses before many engineers. And now, as it is beginning to emerge within the paddock, the British would have begun to detect very worrying behaviors in the SF26 related to energy management and stability under acceleration. The biggest fear is that Ferrari is entering a technical trap that is extremely difficult to solve, because currently the car depends too much on very specific settings to function correctly. When they manage to place the SF26 within its ideal operating window, the rhythm appears immediately. But that window is incredibly narrow. Minimal changes in temperature, degradation, or downforce completely alter the balance of the car. And Canada is probably one of the worst possible circuits for such a sensitive car. Montreal demands aggressive braking, maximum traction stability, and brutal efficiency on the straight. Exactly the three areas where Ferrari is showing the most accumulated weaknesses. And here another problem appears that is beginning to worry a lot within the team. Psychological wear, because Leclerc has been supporting projects for years that promise much more than what they finally deliver. Each new regulation seemed to be the definitive year for Ferrari. Every technical change generated hope in Maranello. But misconceptions, aerodynamic correlation problems, or unexpected limitations constantly appeared. And now the Monégasque is once again facing a dangerously similar situation. The difference is that this time Ferrari no longer has room for patience. Hamilton's arrival raised expectations to gigantic levels. The 2026 project was to represent the beginning of a new dominant era. Ferrari brought together important engineers, reorganized technical structures, and aggressively opted for its own philosophy, while other teams took more conservative paths. But now very uncomfortable doubts are beginning to arise. What if Ferrari misinterpreted the regulations from the beginning? What if Mercedes understood energy integration better? What if McLaren built a much more adaptable aerodynamic platform for the future? Because while Ferrari is still looking for balance, other teams already seem to be evolving on much more solid bases. McLaren, for example, has shown an extremely aggressive evolution since 2025, developing practically every area of the car with a very clear technical direction. Mercedes, for its part, would have achieved one of the most efficient hybrid systems on the entire grid. And Red Bull, although going through major internal problems, still has extremely advanced aerodynamic understanding in high-speed conditions. Ferrari, on the other hand, seems to still be stuck trying to solve several fundamental weaknesses at the same time. The worrying thing is that this situation is beginning to generate a domino effect. When the car loses rear stability, Hamilton and Leclerc must constantly modify their driving style. That alters energy consumption. The energy change affects electrical deployment. The deployment alters top speed. The loss of speed forces you to defend more aggressively when cornering. And everything ends up punishing tires and degradation. Ferrari is not fighting a single problem. You are fighting an entire ecosystem of interconnected weaknesses. That's why Miami's updates were so desperate. 11 simultaneous changes are not a normal evolution. They are practically emergency surgery on a car that still does not give complete confidence to its own engineers. And although Ferrari publicly tries to convey calm, within the paddock many are already beginning to suspect that Canada will be the first truly brutal test to discover if the SF26 has the makings of a champion, or if it is simply a fast car incapable of sustaining a long fight for the title. And the most dangerous thing for Ferrari is that if Montreal goes wrong, the pressure could explode immediately. Because Hamilton did not come to Maranello to participate in eternal reconstructions. He came to win. Leclerc also cannot afford to continue wasting years of his career waiting for a project that never ends up coming together. And within Ferrari, everyone knows perfectly well that the 2026 regulation could define the next great dominator of Formula One for many years. That's why Canada is not just another race. Canada could become the exact moment where Ferrari discovers if it really built a project capable of leading the new era, or if the SF26 hides a much deeper fragility than anyone imagined at the beginning of the season. And then we come to the most delicate point of this whole story. Because after analyzing the technical weaknesses, the desperate updates, and the enormous pressure that exists within Maranello, the question that really scares Ferrari before Canada 2026 appears: what if the SF26 problem can't be completely solved this season? Because that would change absolutely everything. Formula One is entering a new era where teams don't just compete for an annual championship. They are fighting to build the technological base that could dominate for the next 5 or 6 years. Exactly the same as happened with Mercedes in 2014 or Red Bull in 2022. And Ferrari knows perfectly well that making a mistake now could condemn them again to chasing other teams for a very long time. That is why Canada generates so much internal tension. Montreal will be one of the first circuits where the 2026 regulation will force the real efficiency of each hybrid project to be fully exposed. It will no longer be enough to hide weaknesses behind slow cornering or extreme downforce settings. Canada obliges to show the truth. There you discover who really has power, energy efficiency, and stability under pressure. And Ferrari arrives with doubts in exactly those 3 areas. An uncomfortable feeling is already beginning to set in within the paddock. The SF26 could be one of the fastest cars on the grid, but also one of the most difficult to exploit consistently. That combination is very dangerous, because in Formula One the most spectacular car does not always win. The most stable project wins, the most understandable for its engineers, and the one that allows it to evolve without constantly destroying the general balance of the car. That's where many begin to look with concern at the path Ferrari took. While Mercedes would have prioritized energy efficiency and operational ease from the beginning of the regulations, Ferrari opted for a much more aggressive concept seeking to maximize aerodynamic performance and cornering speed. The problem is that when this philosophy loses balance, exactly the symptoms that the Scuderia is suffering today appear. Structural oversteer, excessive energy consumption, extreme sensitivity to configurations, and difficulty maintaining a constant pace in the race. And Hamilton probably already understood that, because the Briton knows perfectly well what a champion project looks like from the inside. He lived it during the dominant Mercedes era. There the car could adapt to practically any circuit without completely losing its competitive identity. Ferrari, on the other hand, still seems to rely too much on finding a near-perfect setup to survive each weekend. And in such a long and technically demanding season, that can destroy any title aspiration. The most worrying thing is that Ferrari is starting to run out of time. Every update they introduce consumes gigantic resources in an era where budget constraints force extremely calculated decisions. And while they try to correct the current problems of the SF26, at the same time, they need to continue developing the future of the 2027 project. This generates brutal pressure within the technical department, because if they continue chasing structural errors for too long, they could end up compromising even the next seasons. That is why many within the paddock consider Canada as a kind of early final exam. If Ferrari manages to survive competitively in Montreal, it will mean that the SF26 26 still has a solid foundation on which to build. But if energy and aerodynamic weaknesses explode publicly again, the narrative around Ferrari could radically change in a matter of days. And that would have enormous consequences. It will be the circuit where Ferrari will have to demonstrate if it really understood how to build a champion car for 2026. Or if it simply created an extremely fast car full of weaknesses that are impossible to hide when the maximum demands arrive. The Montreal straights are going to expose energy efficiency. The braking will reveal the real stability of the SF26. And the race pace will end up showing if Ferrari has finally solved its structural problems or if it is still stuck searching for answers. The most shocking thing is that probably not even within Maranello, they still have absolute certainty about the true potential of this project. And that perfectly explains the desperation with which they have worked in recent weeks. 11 updates in Miami. Constant configuration changes. Aggressive adjustments. Ferrari knows that it is playing a very dangerous game where each race can completely alter the future of the team. That's why the Canadian Grand Prix could end up being remembered as a key moment for Ferrari. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.